The city of Harrowgate was not merely old, it was calcified, an enormous lesion of gray stone and rusted iron frozen beneath a perpetual bruised sky. Light here was a burden. Sound was a trespass. The entire metropolis existed in a state of arrested development, cold, quiet, oppressive stasis, known only as the Great Stillness. Kellen, a finder by trade, navigated the skeletal remains of the lower sectors. His job was to retrieve artifacts, forgotten tools, petrified clockwork components, or scraps of iron too dense to rust, which were then sold to the silent collectors of the upper spire. His current haunt was the Tainted Veins, collapsed sewer lines below the old clockwork district where the air was thick with ancient oil and the coppery smell of history. Kellen moved with the practiced, minimal motion of a shadow, his oil lamp casting a nervous, flickering pool of light on the damp, weeping stone. The stillness permeated everything, muting every footstep, every scrape of iron against rock. It was the only reason Harrowgate survived, but it was also why the city felt like a giant, slowly dying corpse. Hours passed in a suffocating silence that Kellen had long learned to trust. It meant nothing dangerous was currently moving near him. He was about to give up his search for the night, his muscles aching with the cold, when his lamp flared. Not a purposeful flare, but a violent, nervous jump of the flame, as if sensing a profound metallic presence. Kellen froze, extinguishing the lamp instantly, trusting his night vision over the capricious flame. Embedded in a seam of petrified wood that had ceased to be wood a century prior was a sliver of metallic silver. It didn't reflect light. It seemed to absorb it, holding the darkness close. He used his small iron pry bar, a tool worn smooth by 2 generations of finders, to loosen the object. It came free with a reluctant, sucking sound, like a deep breath being taken after years of silence. Kellen reignited his lamp, shielding the flame with his coat, and held the object up. It was a key. But not just any key. It was impossibly small, barely 2 inches long, crafted from polished, flawless obsidian and fine, unmarked silver. It was impossibly thin and weighed almost nothing, yet it radiated an intense, unnerving cold. It had no bow, no visible wards, and the grooves that formed the working edge were minute, intricate, and utterly incomprehensible, seeming to spell out nothing at all. As he held it, Kellen felt an internal vibration, a deep, silent frequency only he could perceive, resonating in his chest cavity. It felt like the muted roar of a distant, trapped ocean. He knew instantly that this was the most dangerous thing he had ever found. This was not a tool for opening a box. It was a mechanism for unlocking a truth. He tucked the key deep into a hidden pocket sewn into his lining. The crystallized echo he had sought could wait. This small, cold object demanded immediate, paranoid attention. Kellen reversed his route and exited the Tainted Veins, heading for the surface. On the streets above, the city felt different. Stillness felt thinner, the quiet louder, as if the key was a magnet drawing out the suppressed energy of Harrowgate. Kellen felt hunted by the very atmosphere. He needed answers, and in Harrowgate, only one person held the truly restricted knowledge: Archivist Lyra. A stern, ancient woman who resided in the historical archive tower of the upper sectors. The journey was grueling. Kellen had to bribe 3 city watch patrols and navigate the winding, segregated paths that divided the working-class sectors from the ivory and iron structures of the elite. He found Lyra in her office, a high chamber surrounded by mountains of brittle parchment and towering stacks of brass-bound chronicles that threatened to topple at any moment. The air was dry and smelled of dust and old ink. Lyra was tall and frail, her eyes magnified to an unnatural size behind thick, concave glass lenses. She did not look up from the fragile text she was examining, merely indicating a high, hard stool with a skeletal hand. Kellen placed the key on the dark mahogany of her desk. He pushed it forward, watching her closely, ready to grab it back at the slightest sign of aggression. The instant the key made contact with the wood, Lyra froze. Her reading hand, which held a magnifying glass, remained suspended midair. The only sound was the faint, dry rustle of the parchment under her other hand. She raised her head slowly, her magnified gaze the size of dinner plates locking onto the obsidian artifact. Her reaction was instantaneous and complex. Deep, profound recognition, mixed with fear and a flash of unsettling avarice. "Where did you find this?" she demanded, her voice a dry rasp, a sound Kellen had never heard from her before. It lacked the usual academic neutrality. Kellen provided a vague but plausible location in the derelict foundry district, watching how she reacted to the lie. She nodded, accepting it, but her eyes never left the key. She referred to it by several titles whispered in the oldest texts: the silence gauge, the lock of the deepest night, and the seed of unmaking. It was a remnant from the very founding of Harrowgate during the Great Stillness. Lyra explained the city's grim truth. Centuries ago, Harrowgate was not silent but screaming with uncontrollable, self-destructive magic, ready to tear itself apart. The founders, known as the Silent Architects, initiated the Great Stillness, a catastrophic Singalese, world-freezing spell that contained the chaos in a massive central mechanism. "They did not destroy the noise," Lyra whispered, leaning closer, her breath smelling of decay. "They simply trapped it, freezing all destructive energy into the constant, oppressive stasis we call peace." She confirmed Kellen's worst suspicion, and this key is the single-use mechanism for the reversal of that spell. It is the key to undoing the stillness. Her voice became urgent, almost panicked. "It must be destroyed, Kellen. Now, take it to the deep furnaces. Melt it down until nothing remains but ash and vapor. Do not wait." Kellen took the key back, its icy cold, a familiar anchor. He thanked her and began to leave, but paused at the door. He had seen the avarice beneath the fear. Lyra didn't want the key destroyed. She wanted it for herself. She wanted the power of its reversal, the capacity to wield the chaotic energy of the frozen city. As he descended the archive tower, the shadows felt more substantial, the air cooler. He knew she had lied about the destruction and was likely already mobilizing her own resources. He glanced behind him as he crossed the stone commons. A figure was following, cloaked and too quiet even for the stillness. He did not need to see her face to know it was Lyra. The chase began not with speed, but with environmental manipulation. As Kellen turned down a narrow path, a section of the cobbled road ahead collapsed, forcing him to backtrack instantly. Lyra, the archivist, commanded the city's ossified infrastructure. Street lamps shattered, a sudden surge of ancient steam blocked an alleyway, and a power outage plunged 3 sectors into pitch blackness. Kellen realized he couldn't outrun her influence. He needed a place where the Silent Architects had intentionally left a weakness a sanctuary or a lock for his key. He recalled a nursery rhyme, one of the old, dark Harrowgate rhymes he'd heard as a child. The first whisper finds the hinges of time, where the smallest key hides the greatest crime. The refuge of the first whisper, a legendary hidden chamber, said to be buried deep within the oldest foundations of the city, accessible only through a hidden, subtle mechanism. His destination was the apex stump, the massive Neopian stone base, upon which the entire city was theoretically built central, exposed, and seemingly impossible to breach. The danger of heading there was immense, but the threat of the key falling into Lyra's hands was the end of Harrowgate. He chose the most direct, most suicidal route. He climbed onto the roofs of the Mid-Spire district, leaping across gaps, the obsidian key burning cold in his pocket. The frequency it emitted was now a constant, high-pitched whine. Lyra appeared on a parallel rooftop, her movements unnaturally swift for a frail woman. She was not running, but gliding, almost floating. "Thought the key demands its home, Kellen," she called out, her voice amplified and distorted, echoing off the iron chimney stacks. "It is tired of silence. Surrender it, and you will be richly rewarded in the new beginning." Kellen ignored her, jumping a precarious 3-meter gap to reach the next building, his heart hammering against his ribs. The sound of his landing was swallowed by the stillness. He dropped down into the alleyway adjacent to the apex stump. The stump itself was a perfect column of seamless jet-black stone, impossibly smooth and unblemished. Lyra's shadow lengthened behind him as she descended to the ground. Kellen pressed himself against the cold stone, desperately searching for any sign of a mechanism. He ran his hand over the base, searching for a joint, a lever, a button. Nothing. The surface was designed to deter any search. But he remembered the key's nature. It was small, subtle, and its power was in its unique frequency. It would not open a massive lock. It would open a massive secret with a tiny imperfection. He found it. A hairline fracture in the stone, no thicker than a thread, running vertically for about a foot. It was invisible unless you were searching for nothing at all. Kellen pressed the obsidian key flat against the fracture. The internal vibration of the key stopped instantly, replaced by a deep, powerful counterfrequency from the stone itself. The crack widened with an audible crack, and a single, blinding, white-gold beam of light shot out into the gloom. It illuminated a hidden passage, a perfect circle of light against the oppressive gray of Harrowgate. The key had required only contact, not turning. It was the frequency that mattered. Kellen plunged into the hole, pulling the key free as he fell. The circle of light snapped shut behind him, sealing the fracture and plunging the corridor into darkness. He landed hard on a floor of smooth, cool marble. The air here was pristine. No dust, no soot, just the faint, coppery smell of old, immense power. He was in the refuge of the First Whisper. It was a small, circular chamber, its walls inscribed with the sprawling, detailed history of the Great Stillness. In the center sat the object he had sought, the reason for the city's existence, the Silent Heart, a massive, perfect sphere of polished, ancient iron, humming and pulsing with a slow, mechanical beat. The inscriptions on the wall detailed the mechanism's operation. It took the city's raw, destructive chaos, the noise, the magic, the violence, and converted it into a singular, perpetual state of kinetic stasis. It was a prison for destruction, keeping Harrowgate safe, but permanently locked in its grim, gray peace. Then Kellen read the final, most terrifying inscription, one that Lyra had failed to mention. The key's true purpose was not to unlock the stillness. It was a failsafe, designed to overload and shatter the Silent Heart in a catastrophic feedback loop. It would destroy the mechanism and release the stored chaos locally, destroying the refuge and the key along with it. It was a bomb, a self-destruct function designed to preserve the global stillness at the cost of the mechanism's very core. A heavy grinding sound echoed above as a circular section of the marble ceiling slid aside, revealing the bruised sky above. Archivist Lyra descended on a lowered platform of tarnished brass. Her eyes were glowing, no longer magnified, but filled with an unnatural, hungry golden light. She carried a weapon, a heavy mace, made not of iron, but of solidified, crystallized echo. "You found it, Finder? And you led me straight to it," she hissed, her voice now resonant and deep, no longer frail. "I learned too much, but not quite enough." "The Silent Heart is not a safeguard," Lyra confessed, taking a slow, predatory step. "It is a vessel. And the chaos it contains, the raw, screaming magic, is the rightful power of my ancient masters, the Unmakers." Lyra served the Unmakers, the forces of noise, oblivion, and true cosmic entropy. She didn't want the stillness undone. She wanted the mechanism unwound. She explained that if the key was inserted and turned one quarter, the action she called unwinding the thread, the stillness would reverse slowly, releasing the contained chaos in a controlled torrent. This controlled chaos would grant Lyra and the Unmakers the power to rule Harrowgate, converting its static peace into a terrifying, personalized Armageddon. "Give me the key, Kellen, or become the first casualty in the history of Harrowgate's true beginning," she commanded. Raising the crystallized mace, which pulsed with dark, trapped energy, Kellen gripped the obsidian key, feeling its chilling promise of destruction. He looked at the Silent Heart, then back at Lyra's terrible, power-crazed face. He felt the weight of the city, its grayness, its cold, quiet, sad peace, resting on his decision. He had a choice: Lyra's controlled, tyrannical destruction, or the architect's catastrophic, total sacrifice. He had to deny Lyra. The only way was the self-destruct, the total sacrifice of the key and the refuge. Preserving the greater stillness, though perhaps fracturing it forever, he raised the key toward the small, circular access port for the failsafe. Located just above the center of the Silent Heart, Lyra shrieked, a sound of pure, unadulterated terror and betrayal. "No, you fool. We'll tear the weave. You will waste centuries of power," she screamed, dropping the mace and lunging. Kellen dodged the sweeping attack, the mace striking the marble floor and sending shards flying. Sprinted toward the Silent Heart, knowing his time was milliseconds. Lyra was fast, fueled by the proximity of her goal, but Kellen was desperate, fueled by the love of a grim, quiet home. He reached the access port and plunged the obsidian key into it with all his might. The metal-on-metal connection was instantaneous, devastating, and final. The silent heart wailed a sound that was both a piercing shriek of metal under stress and a heavy, grinding planetary moan. It was the sound of a god dying. The chamber filled with a blinding purple-black light. The unleashed, suppressed chaos of Harrogate's history began to flood the refuge. A million forgotten screams, the clash of ancient swords, the roaring of a terrifying engine-driven storm, all erupted at once in a silent internal explosion of light. Lyra recovered, her face contorted in a final maniacal rage. She scrabbled at the silent heart, trying to pull the key free. To perform the unwinding before the fail-safe completed. Before she could touch it, the floor beneath them vaporized in a massive inward implosion. The entire silent heart mechanism began to collapse into the void beneath the refuge. Kellen managed to grab a jagged piece of marble that remained momentarily stable. He saw Lyra plummeting into the terrifying, chaotic light, her final guttural scream lost instantly as she hit the implosion field. The silent heart was gone, consumed entirely by the key's destructive self-sacrifice.
Ow.
The refuge itself shuddered, convulsed, and finally began to stabilize around a deep, fractured chasm.
Ow.
Kellen dragged himself out of the ruined chasm and climbed back into the light of the upper sectors.
Oh.
The apex stump was fractured, a plume of eerie, soundless white smoke rising from its peak. The great stillness was preserved, but it was profoundly and irrevocably shifted. Kellen looked out over the city. It was still gray, still quiet, still oppressed. But a far-off street lamp in the workers' quarters flickered a brighter, almost golden yellow, before settling back to its familiar dimness. A bell in a forgotten clock tower chimed once. It was a clear, sharp sound, a note never heard before in the eternally muffled city. It was a momentary breach in the stillness. The key's destruction had preserved Harrowgate, but it had made the fragile peace more precarious, slightly more enlivened, infinitely more dangerous. The knowledge of the chaos beneath was Kellen's burden now. He was no longer just a finder. He was a keeper of the city's greatest, darkest truth. He knew the unmakers Lyra served were now aware of the vulnerability, the fractured nature of the stillness. They would send others, would try again to exploit the tiny, precious flicker of life he had allowed to escape. Kellen began to descend the clock tower, his movements slow and deliberate. His first task was to secure the archive, to ensure no other servant of oblivion could access the texts. The life of a finder, the scavenger of the dead city, was over. The life of the watchman, the silent guardian of the fractured lie, had begun. He paused at a street corner, blending into the deeper shadows. He saw other small signs, a patch of tenacious moss that had suddenly sprung to life, a small dog barking twice instead of its usual single muffled yelp. The tiniest objects held the greatest secrets, and the greatest moral act, Kellen mused, was sometimes not to open the lock, but to destroy the key and accept the terrible responsibility that came with the choice. He disappeared into the labyrinthine streets, shadow amongst the soot and the stone, the silent custodian of the world's most dangerous, most necessary lie. Did Kellen make the right choice, or did he just create a ticking time bomb? Make sure to like, share, and subscribe to Storycraft Studio for more dark fantasies and epic adventures.